The screaming sirens came out of nowhere, slicing through the sleepy calm of Pelican Bay like a blade. One moment, the neighborhood was bathed in golden afternoon light, manicured lawns soaking up the sun, birds flitting between palm trees, and the next, it was chaos. Red and blue lights danced across the windows of our quiet home, reflecting off the polished tile floor like a warning. My heart thudded so loudly I could barely hear myself think. I held Elsa close to me, her fragile body trembling in my arms. She hadn't spoken since we returned from the clubhouse. Her face was pale, her jaw clenched, and her wrist cradled gently in an ice pack. I tried to keep my voice calm for her sake, whispering, "It's going to be okay, baby." Though deep down, I wasn't sure I believed it. The worst part wasn't just what had happened. It was knowing that everyone in this perfect little neighborhood now knew too. Pelican Bay was many things: luxurious, picturesque, elite. But it was also tight-knit in the most suffocating sense of the word. Word traveled fast, and whispers moved faster. Neighbors had already gathered across the street, clumping together in little knots of concern and morbid curiosity, their eyes darting from the flashing lights to our front door. They didn't need gossip apps or online threads anymore. The drama had arrived on their doorstep. The doorbell rang, sharp and clear. I kissed the top of Elsa's head, forcing myself to breathe, then stood and walked to the door on legs that felt like stone. 2 officers stood before me, faces neutral but alert. "Dr. Foster," the taller one said. "I'm Officer Reynolds. This is Officer Chen. We'd like to discuss the incident at the Pelican Bay clubhouse earlier today. We understand your daughter was assaulted." The word hit me like a slap. Assaulted. Just hours ago, Elsa and I had been dressing up for a neighborhood event, our biggest concern being whether the new terrace would have a decent view of the ocean. Now everything had spiraled into something unthinkable. I nodded stiffly and stepped aside, inviting them into our home, trying to summon the composure that had once carried me through emergency surgeries and life-or-death trauma calls. But this was different. This wasn't a stranger on an operating table. This was my child. My Elsa. I led the officers to the living room where she sat in her wheelchair, her injured wrist carefully wrapped, her eyes cast downward, as though even making eye contact might reopen the wound in her heart. She looked so small in that moment, so impossibly vulnerable. She was 14. That age where fitting in feels like a matter of life and death. And today, in front of half our neighborhood, she'd been humiliated in a way no child should ever experience. Officer Chen spoke softly, his tone gentle. "Elsa, can you tell us what happened, in your own words?" She looked up at me, unsure, scared. I nodded, squeezing her hand, and slowly, her voice shaky but brave, she began to recount everything that had turned our world upside down. It hadn't always been like this. In fact, when we first moved to Pelican Bay, it felt like stepping into a dream. After years of grief and trauma, after my husband's death and Elsa's accident, I had prayed for just one thing: peace. A place where we could rebuild, where my daughter could heal, where we could breathe again. When I got the offer from Pelican Bay Memorial Hospital to join their surgical team, it felt like a sign. I knew the town by reputation: exclusive, quiet, beautifully maintained, and though the price tags were steep, the promise of stability was worth it. The Mediterranean-style home we purchased had already been outfitted with some accessibility features, thanks to a previous owner who'd cared for an aging parent. It needed upgrades, sure, but it was workable. Elsa could navigate most of it on her own. For once, the world didn't feel like it was constantly pushing against her. The community itself seemed like something out of a magazine. Smooth sidewalks lined with palm trees, perfect hedges clipped to precision, smiling neighbors offering introductions and iced lemonade. We were welcomed by some lovely people. Marcus Thompson, our neighbor, was a civil rights attorney with a booming laugh and a heart that seemed far too big for someone in HOA territory. He bonded with Elsa immediately, inviting her over to watch sports and talk about whatever was on her mind. Then there was Eleanor Blackwell, regal and elegant in her late 70s, who brought us warm cookies and talked about the town's history with reverence. She was a fixture in Pelican Bay, and people respected her deeply. For a while, it felt like we had made the right decision. Elsa started smiling more, engaging again. She even said she liked school. That was something I hadn't heard in years, but not everyone was welcoming. There was one woman who stood apart from the rest. Victoria Reed, HOA Vice President, local business owner, and unofficial queen of Pelican Bay. She carried herself like she owned the entire town, because in many ways, she acted like she did. Our first real encounter came when I submitted plans to the HOA for further modifications to make our home more accessible. We needed a wider driveway to accommodate Elsa's adaptive van, a gently sloped front ramp that wouldn't wear out her arms, and a pool lift for hydrotherapy. Nothing outlandish, nothing that would disrupt the community. Or so I thought. Victoria's response was swift and severe. A formal letter dripping with passive-aggressive language, citing everything from neighborhood harmony to property value concerns. She questioned the necessity of every modification, writing things like, "While we understand the need for accessibility, surely there are less visually intrusive options available." That was my first clue. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was about control, about exclusion. I responded with documentation, letters from doctors, legal citations from the ADA, professional architectural renderings that showed how the upgrades would blend seamlessly with the home's design. Grace Rivera, the HOA president, eventually overruled Victoria and approved the plans. But that didn't end it. No, it began something much uglier. From that point forward, Victoria Reed made us her personal project. Her massive white mansion was only 3 doors down, perfectly situated to keep watch over everything we did. Any minor infraction, a medical supply box left on the porch, fallen leaves from a storm, Elsa's van parked for more than 10 minutes, was met with a formal HOA complaint. She acted like a self-appointed enforcer, hiding behind rules while making it clear that families like ours weren't welcome. At first, I tried to ignore it. I had a demanding job. Elsa needed stability. We didn't have the energy to get into petty battles with a woman whose ego outweighed her empathy. Marcus warned me, though. One evening, as we chatted over the fence, he said, "She's driven people out before. Last year it was the Patels, claimed their cooking offended the neighborhood's aroma. She's not just picky, she's a bully with a title." I should have listened more carefully. I underestimated just how far Victoria Reed was willing to go to protect her precious illusion of perfection. And now, as Elsa recounted to the officers what that woman did to her, how she stepped in her way, how she pushed her out of her wheelchair like she was garbage, I felt something inside me ignite. A line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored cardstock, embossed with gold foil lettering that screamed luxury and self-importance. "You are cordially invited to the grand reopening of the Pelican Bay Clubhouse." There was a full itinerary inside: champagne fountains, gourmet catering, live music, a ceremonial ribbon cutting on the new oceanfront terrace. It was the kind of event designed to dazzle, to remind everyone how exclusive and elite Pelican Bay really was. Victoria Reed's name was listed prominently, of course. Renovation chairwoman. She had orchestrated the entire project, curated every tile, every planter, every panoramic view, and now she was ready to unveil her masterpiece. Every resident was expected to attend, to admire, to applaud. When the invitation first arrived, Elsa had hesitated. "Do we have to go?" she asked, quietly studying the elegant envelope like it might bite her. I told her no, of course not. We didn't owe anyone our presents. But I also saw something in her eyes, something she tried to hide. A longing, a flicker of hope. It wasn't about the terrace or the free food. It was about being seen, included, normal. After everything she'd been through, the accident, the loss of her father, the surgeries, the endless rehab, she just wanted one moment of belonging. Her therapist, Dr. Chen, had said it best. Community is healing, he'd told us. The more she participates, the more she reclaims her space in the world. And so we made the decision. We'd go. That morning, Elsa carefully chose her outfit. Her favorite pink blouse, the one with little silver stars on the sleeves, and dark jeans that fit just right. She brushed her hair with extra care, added a delicate necklace, and smiled at herself in the mirror. It was a rare, precious smile, the kind that reminded me so much of her father. I had to look away for a second just to keep my composure. We loaded up her wheelchair, double-checked the tires and the brakes, and made our way to the clubhouse under a sky so blue it almost seemed like a good omen. The celebration was already in full swing when we arrived. Elegant decorations wrapped around every pillar. Fairy lights twinkled overhead despite the daylight, and music floated through the air like perfume. People were dressed to impress, sipping bubbly from crystal flutes and nibbling on hors d'oeuvres prepared by some chef whose name was probably trademarked. Everyone was smiling, mingling, laughing in that effortless way people do when they feel entirely at home. For a brief moment I thought maybe, just maybe, we could blend in. But then I saw her, Victoria Reed, standing near the velvet rope that marked the entrance to the new terrace, surrounded by HOA board members and wealthy admirers, holding court like some suburban queen. Her white pantsuit gleamed in the sun, and her surgically perfected smile was on full display, until her eyes landed on us. Her gaze zeroed in on Elsa's wheelchair like it was a cockroach crawling across a wedding cake. The smile faltered, and the air seemed to grow colder. We tried to steer away, to circle through the crowd and approach the terrace from another angle, but the layout of the space made that impossible. The terrace was the main attraction, and the only access point was past Victoria. Elsa caught me hesitating and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "It's okay, Mum," she whispered. "I'm not going to let her ruin this for me." And just like that, my brave girl rolled forward, shoulders straight, chin high, wheels humming softly over the stone floor. Victoria turned toward us, her expression already souring. "Dr. Foster," she said, her voice syrupy, and just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I wasn't sure this kind of event would be of interest to you considering the limitations some guests face." I forced a polite smile. "The invitation mentioned full accessibility," I replied evenly. "Elsa's been looking forward to the terrace reveal." Victoria gave a tight, condescending smile. "Yes, well, we did install the necessary accommodations, at considerable expense, I might add, though I must admit I'm a little concerned about the wheels marking the Italian marble during the official photography session." I could feel Elsa tense beside me, but she kept her composure, her hands steady on the rims of her chair. "The wheels are non-marking," I said calmly, but firmly. "They were designed specifically to prevent that." Victoria made a dramatic show of glancing down at the floor, as if searching for damage. "We've arranged for the original renovation committee to be at the forefront of the ribbon cutting. It's important to maintain visual harmony for the photos." Her words were sharp, pointed. "Perhaps you could wait until after the ceremony to tour the terrace." The conversations around us dimmed. People were listening now, pretending they weren't, but clearly hanging on every word. Elsa started to back up. "It's fine, Mum," she said softly. "I don't need to be in the photos." And that was it. That was the moment. Something inside me snapped. My daughter had spent years fighting to reclaim her life. She'd survived trauma, fought through surgeries, adapted to a world not built for her. And here was this woman, this petty, prideful woman, trying to shrink her down again. "No," I said, louder than I intended. "We were invited like everyone else. The law is clear. The ADA guarantees—" "Oh, please," Victoria cut in, rolling her eyes. "Let's not turn this into a legal debate. This is a celebration. Not everything has to be about accommodations." She leaned in, her voice a cold whisper. "Your daughter's chair is an eyesore. I've spent months perfecting this space, and I won't have it ruined in the official photos. I'm asking you, nicely, to remove her from the area until after the ceremony." Elsa's cheeks flushed crimson. She turned away, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "It's okay," she murmured. "We can go." But I wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. "No, Elsa," I said. "You have every right to be here." I turned back to Victoria. "Your behavior is not only inappropriate, it's discriminatory. Now step aside." Elsa moved forward again, maneuvering carefully around Victoria. But just as she was about to pass, Victoria stepped sideways. She blocked the path. Again. And then it happened. She reached out and placed her hand on the back of Elsa's wheelchair. Whether it was intentional or the result of some frustrated instinct, we'll never know for sure. But with one firm push, she shoved. The chair rocked violently. Elsa gasped, and before I could react, the front wheels caught on the uneven edge of the marble tile. The chair tipped sideways. Time slowed to a crawl. My daughter, my beautiful girl who had fought so hard for her independence, crashed to the floor with a sickening thud. Gasps exploded around the room. Someone dropped a wine glass. My heart stopped. I was on my knees beside her in an instant, adrenaline rushing through my veins. "Elsa, can you hear me? Are you hurt? Can you move your arms?" She blinked, dazed. I think so. My wrist hurts." People began to crowd around. Some stood frozen, others knelt to help. Marcus pushed his way through, phone already out, dialing for help. Eleanor stood nearby, hands trembling, but her voice rang clear as a bell. "You pushed her, Victoria. I saw you put your hands on that wheelchair and push." Victoria's face contorted in fury and disbelief. "She must have lost control," she shouted. "These floors are slippery. I was just guiding her out of the photo zone." But no one was buying it. Not anymore. The mood had shifted. The glamour was gone. And all that remained was a community staring down the raw, ugly truth of what one woman had done in the name of her so-called standards. By the time the paramedics arrived, the clubhouse had transformed from a scene of celebration to one of stunned silence and whispered outrage. Elsa was helped gently back into her wheelchair, with Marcus steadying one side and a nurse from my hospital on the other. Her wrist had swollen visibly, and she winced every time it moved. But more than the physical pain, it was the look in her eyes that stayed with me, like something inside her had cracked. Not broken completely, but chipped in a way that only happens when someone's dignity is stolen in public. She kept her head down, refusing to meet anyone's gaze, while I answered questions and gave statements to the security officer, now hastily collecting information. Grace Rivera, the HOA president, rushed over in visible distress, practically pushing through the crowd to get to us. Her face was ashen, her voice shaking as she asked if we needed an ambulance or further medical care. I told her Elsa needed to be checked more thoroughly at home, away from this circus. Grace nodded, and to her credit, she didn't try to downplay what had happened. "I'm so sorry," she said, looking Elsa in the eyes. "We'll take this very seriously." But even her calm leadership couldn't contain the tremor that had spread through the community. The crowd was no longer buzzing with praise for the marble floors and panoramic views. The only thing people were talking about now was Victoria Reed and what they had just witnessed. Victoria, meanwhile, was grasping at straws. Her voice cut through the chatter, trying to regain control of the moment. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was a crowded event. She lost her balance." But the more she spoke, the more damage she did. Several residents called her out directly. Some shook their heads and walked away, and others simply stared in disbelief, trying to reconcile the woman they had supported on the HOA board with the one who had just shoved a child out of a wheelchair. Marcus leaned close to me and said quietly but firmly, "This wasn't an accident. This was assault, and you need to file a report tonight." I nodded. My jaw was tight, my hands shaking, but my voice was clear. "We're not letting this go." Back home, Elsa curled up on the couch, exhausted, her wrist now wrapped properly with a splint. The police officers had already taken our statements, and they assured us that they would follow up immediately. They'd seen and heard enough to initiate the process. "Will she be arrested?" Elsa asked softly, her voice small. The officers didn't answer directly. "We're conducting a full investigation. But based on what we've heard today, charges are likely," one said with sincerity. After they left, Elsa finally allowed herself to cry. The kind of cry that comes when you've been holding it together for far too long. "I hate this chair," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. Dad would have never let her talk to me like that. I held her tighter than I had in a long time. "Your dad would be proud of you," I told her, my own voice cracking. "So proud of how strong you are. Victoria Reed is the one who should feel ashamed." Later that night, Marcus returned, his briefcase in hand and resolve in his eyes. We sat at the kitchen table while Elsa rested in the other room. He explained everything carefully. The differences between criminal and civil proceedings, the protections Elsa had under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the grounds for emotional distress. "This wasn't just an assault," he said. "It was a civil rights violation." He was right. It wasn't just about Elsa's bruised wrist or the embarrassment she'd suffered. It was about making sure no one else in this community, or any other, had to endure what she did. The next morning, we filed a civil lawsuit against Victoria Reed, citing assault, battery, emotional distress, and ADA violations. The news traveled fast. The Pelican Bay community, once quiet and tight-lipped, exploded into hushed alliances and whispered judgment. Some residents reached out with apologies and offers of support. Others avoided eye contact in public spaces. And then there were the few, Victoria's loyalists, who suggested, behind closed doors and carefully chosen words, that perhaps we were making too big a deal out of an unfortunate misunderstanding. But no matter how they tried to spin it, the facts remained. Victoria Reed had pushed a disabled child out of her wheelchair, in front of witnesses, during a public event. There was no walking that back. The weeks that followed were hard. Elsa, who had been making so much progress, began to withdraw again. She skipped social gatherings. She refused to go to the beach. She didn't want to be seen. "She made me feel like I was ruining everything," she told Dr. Chen in one of her sessions. "Like just being there was a problem." The therapist documented both her physical and emotional injuries for the case, adding crucial weight to our claims. Meanwhile, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. Grace Rivera led with firm conviction, announcing that, effective immediately, Victoria Reed was being removed from her position pending the outcome of the investigation. "Discrimination has no place in Pelican Bay," she declared, "and assault certainly doesn't." Some grumbled, others applauded, and slowly the neighborhood began to change. In court, the truth stood tall. Victoria's attempts to twist the story unraveled quickly in the face of overwhelming testimony. Eleanor Blackwell's words were especially powerful. "I've lived in Pelican Bay for 3 decades," she said calmly, "and I've never seen anything as disgraceful as what Victoria did that day." The judge listened intently, and when the footage was presented and witness accounts backed it up, Victoria's arrogance collapsed. She attempted to settle the matter quietly, offering money, silence, anything to avoid a verdict. But Marcus made it clear, this isn't about a payout. This is about precedent. When the ruling came, it was swift and decisive. Victoria was sentenced to 200 hours of community service at a spinal cord injury rehabilitation center. She was also required to complete mandatory sensitivity training and, more significantly, to fund disability awareness initiatives for the Pelican Bay community for 5 consecutive years. The civil court also awarded damages for Elsa's pain and suffering, as well as a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The impact rippled through the neighborhood like a stone in still water. Residents who had once looked the other way began organizing accessibility efforts. Ramps were added to buildings that previously had none. Signs were posted promoting inclusivity. And a new committee was formed to ensure every community decision took disability rights into account. Elsa became the unexpected catalyst of change, though she never asked for that role. With Dr. Chen's encouragement, she joined a local adaptive tennis team and found a new outlet for her energy and confidence. She practiced regularly, her strength growing, her spirit rekindling. Neighbors who once stared silently at her now showed up to cheer from the bleachers. The girl they had once dismissed as a disruption was now a local hero. Months later, when her school planned to host their 8th grade dance at a venue that lacked a proper wheelchair ramp, Elsa didn't hesitate. She stood up, figuratively and literally, in front of the PTA and explained why it mattered. Not just for her, but for every student who deserved a night of fun without shame or barriers. The venue was changed, and Elsa was invited to join the student council as a diversity liaison. Her voice, once quiet and unsure, had become something powerful. 2 years after that terrible day, a new ribbon-cutting ceremony took place at Pelican Bay. This time, it was for a fully accessible sports complex, a project funded in part by the settlement Victoria Reed had tried so hard to avoid. And at the front of the ceremony, surrounded by friends, family, neighbors, and supporters, sat Elsa. She held the oversized scissors with steady hands, a smile lighting up her face. And when the ribbon fluttered to the ground, the crowd erupted in cheers. Among them stood Dr. Chen, his eyes filled with pride. "You've done something remarkable," he said later. "You didn't just fight back. You transformed this place." That evening, as we sat on the back patio, watching the sun melt into the horizon, Elsa turned to me and asked, "Do you ever regret moving here?" I thought about it for a moment. About the pain, the injustice, the uphill battle, but also about the growth, the allies, the changes we'd sparked. "Never," I said finally, "because every community has its Victorias. The difference is how the rest of the community responds when people like her show their true colors." Elsa nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "I'm glad we stayed. If we had just left, nothing would have changed." And she was right. Retreat would have been easier. Starting over again, somewhere quieter, would have been simpler. But change never comes from ease. It comes from resistance, from resilience, from speaking out when staying silent is more comfortable. Victoria Reed thought she was protecting Pelican Bay's image by excluding people like my daughter. But what she failed to understand was that true beauty, true strength, lies in inclusion, in respect, in dignity. And thanks to Elsa, this community learned what that really means.